Hello and welcome back to Retro Ranger. Today we're going to talk about some of the most expensive video games to snag in the hobby of retro game collecting. When these released, no one expected any of them to be worth much beyond the life cycle of the system it played on, and I can still remember the bargain bins full of NES cartridges that are now expensive games, like they were the 3 for $5 DVD bins that would soon come after. The point is, for the folks lucky enough to have kept them over the years, or perhaps like me that bought for the older systems because, well, that's what I could afford. Either way, if you had a time machine, chances are you'd skip right past video games and hit it big with a lottery or some choice stocks and still need to pay the premium to collect today. Still, it's fascinating which are rare, which are expensive, and which, amongst the crossover, are any good. Let's take a look at some of the most expensive video games on the current market. Alright, we recently took a look at the Sony PSP, so what tops the price charts for that system? That would be The Legend of Heroes 3, Song of the Ocean. There's actually 4 Legend of Hero games on the PSP, and while Song of the Ocean rings the bell as the most expensive, the rest hold a respectable value as well. They're all RPGs, and Song of the Ocean is no different. You play as the musician Forte, who quickly collects more party members, including his grandpa's dog named Jan, and some others as well, but the dog alone follows you on the map, which is pretty cool. The combat is traditional turn-based, but opts for a lot of in-your-face menuing to accomplish it, which I don't care for. The combat itself is decent, though there are some more emphasis on range, and that's a nice touch, but it actually falls short of a tactical RPG as there's not a ton of planning required, at least not in the beginning of the game. Graphically, I really think this game stands out. The backgrounds are a three-dimensional look and have almost a hand-painted look to them as well, but they remain really crisp, and it also has some really great-looking sprites that sit on top of them. Combined with your usual fantasy styling of music, if you're no stranger to RPGs, you're going to feel right at home here. Where I think it suffers a bit though is the pacing. Its story is very slow, and even though the combat can be okay, experience points as well are hard to come by, so leveling and progression feels equally slow. To be fair, I didn't have the time to actually finish this entire game in time for the episode, so it could absolutely pay off later, but without seeing that happen, it just feels like it crawls in general. All that said, I really hope this is worth it as the price has been steadily increasing, so much so that it actually overtakes the Persona trilogy and more on the console. Today, a complete in-box copy is actually going to run you about $260 at the time of this video, but given its trajectory, it's likely to keep actually rising. Let's move on. Okay, moving right along, we've actually already talked about this next game in our N64 market trends video, but given that it's the most expensive N64 game, that isn't at least a test cartridge or a strange version that is, it's worth circling back on ClayFighter's 63 1/3 Sculptor's cut.
On the camera! Taste forces of fury!
I went on record by saying that I don't think that this game holds up well, and to be honest, the game hasn't really changed my opinion at all as I circle back again. The theme certainly just doesn't do it for me, as I can't get into the claymation stuff that was just so prevalent in the 1990s.
I speak voodoo! Whoa, man! Voodoo! Nice one! Little girly combo! Whoa, man! Fly the voodoo skies!
As a fighting game, I also feel like it lacks a bit when compared to others in the genre. Some good things I can say about it would include a sizable roster and the uniqueness of them, good levels with destructibles to interact with, and thematically it's lighter, which makes sense given its theme. It's just not my taste. This was a Blockbuster exclusive back in its day, which is why getting your hands on a copy is so difficult to do these days. It's also going to cost you a pretty penny, coming in at roughly $1,200 loose or $3,700 complete in box. Suffice to say, this is not worth it in my opinion, but to each their own. Let's move on though to our next game.
Come to kill! Burn, baby, burn! Plata! Plata! The monkey! Burn, baby.
From one Blockbuster exclusive to potentially the next, this is Hagane: The Final Conflict for the Super Nintendo. Are you feeling the pain in the wallet yet? I sure am, as this one cost me quite a bit, even a number of years ago when I finally snagged it up. There's been some debate about whether this is actually a Blockbuster exclusive or if it was just a rumor to drive the price up, but either way, the price is definitely up. In Hagane, you control a robo-ninja of the same name as you take on an opposing ninja clan. There's a bunch of backstory here about how he became a cyborg and why the clans are warring. Spoiler alert, it's about the Holy Grail. But in general, I didn't really care about it, and neither will most of you. At the end of the day, this is a fast-paced action platforming game, and the story matters little if the gameplay loop is tight and enjoyable. I'm happy to report that I think it does well on all fronts. The control of Hagane is crisp and responsive. His moves are genuinely fun to pull off and rewarding as you mow through the level. The music is another strong suit and fits well with the overall theme and action of the game. All that said, it's hard. Really hard. Perhaps it's just destined for the ninja-themed games to be extra challenging, but like many in the same bucket like Ninja Gaiden, its difficulty doesn't come from cheap deaths or unfair tactics, which makes it possible to overcome with time. Today, this game is around $1,000 loose, or $2,500 complete in box. Outside of things like competition carts, Hagane usually trades the most expensive title with arrow fighters, depending on the day. Let's move on though. Okay, next up is Cannon Spike for the Sega Dreamcast. This arcade-style top-down arena shooter currently heralds the pricey side of Dreamcast collecting as the top value holder for the system. In a spirit of Smash TV, you make your way through various levels of increasing difficulty as waves of enemies and bosses cramp your available space to maneuver, forcing you to fight your way out to safety. Fighting will feature both a short and long range attack as well as a special, which are all unique to the character. And speaking of characters, this roster is pretty interesting as Capcom brings forward a number of other series to make its bulk. Arthur from Ghosts and Goblins and Mega Man both really stand out here, but there's also other series represented as well, like Darkstalkers, Street Fighter, and more. The levels of each stage are decent enough and give each a distinct feel from the last one, which works, but with this type of game it really just acts as a simple backdrop to the action. Battling, on the other hand, is very well done with constant action from the onslaught of enemies. Each stage will end with a menacing boss to test your skill and feature some traditional shooter-style projectile patterns, which fits really all too well. Also available is a 2-player couch co-op, which is great arcade fun to be had, but it's also beneficial as you start to crank up the difficulty in-game for a bigger challenge. Today, a copy of Cannon Spike is going to run you a cool $180 just for the disc, or $320 for a complete in jewel case. While I can't really get behind and support the amount, I can confidently say that this is one of the better games on the system, which is saying a heck of a lot for the Dreamcast. If you've not yet secured your own copy, keep an eye on the prices and try to snag it on a low point. Let's move on. Okay, here is Panzer Dragoon Saga for the Sega Saturn. It seems like every Sega Saturn game is ridiculously expensive, and that's because they really are. It's a shame too because this library is really spectacular with a ton of RPGs, fighting games, puzzle games, racing games, and so much more. Today though, we're here to look at just the most expensive, and that title clearly goes to Panzer Dragoon Saga. This is the third installment in the Panzer Dragoon series that took a different approach to that of the on-rail shooter games that came before it. Still true to the overall style and theme though, Sega wraps that all up in a story-driven RPG that really is unique for its genre. For starters, you play as Edge, who is guarding an ancient civilization excavation site, who discovers a mysterious woman within the site. Before being able to make heads or tails of the situation though, Edge and the site get attacked by a rogue military leader known as Kramen and his squadron who steal the artifact lady.
Prosit placeva impeni, transia postas.
While Edge survives the attack, he becomes trapped underground, and only through finding a Dragoon partner is he able to escape and go after Kramen, and from there, the adventure really begins. Combat is pretty interesting in its own right, which uses both turn-based tactics as well as real-time components. There's a heavy emphasis on positioning, which can have players maneuver Edge in a circle around the enemies, but enemies themselves move around quite a bit as well. Your relative position can either open up weak points or put yourself in some real danger. Beyond positioning, Edge and his Dragoon will have 3 action gauges to fill up over time that provide the opportunity to do an action, some of which will take 1, 2, or all 3 gauges of action to pull off. While Edge never gets additional party members to aid in battle, which is kind of a shame, it would have been difficult as well to pull off some of the real-time side of the tactics, and overall this is very unique to the game, so I think it's okay. Today, Panzer Dragoon Saga commands a staggering $1,200 for a complete in-box version. When I originally purchased this, it was closer to about $300, and at that time it was difficult to pull the trigger on. Who knew this one would get really crazy? Either way, it's a fantastic RPG and given the price so often overlooked. Let's move on. Okay, we really can't do this list without talking about Little Samson on the Nintendo Entertainment System. This action platformer has long held the reins of expensive video games, consistently topping the officially licensed game list for the console. A major reason for this is due to the little marketing it received at release, and the game failed to sell well. With a smaller print run to begin with, combined with the fact that this game is actually really good, it makes for a perfect storm of high price tags. The game has you platforming through stages that feature great level design that all play well into the game's main mechanic, which is that you can switch between the 4 main characters at any time to help you traverse and defeat enemies within each stage. Each hero, which consists of a dragon that can jump higher and temporarily fly in the air, a mouse that's super fast and can climb on the walls, a slower moving golem that makes up the muscle of the group and is impervious to spikes, and last but not least, Samson himself, who is good in most categories and sort of a jack of all trades. The physics are Mega Man levels of great, and the usual traps of that game can be seen here too, like spikes and pits. The characters, music, and art are all very impressive, but can be seen tenfold on the game's bosses. In fact, it's difficult to find any real negatives with this game, outside of it generally being on the shorter side and of course the price tag. Today, if you can find it that is, you're looking to fork over something like $2,600 for a loose cartridge, or even more staggering, $5,600 for a complete in-box copy, at least at the time of this video, though I suspect even that is probably on the smaller side of what you'd actually pay. While I can't justify that cost to anyone, it should give some solace that the game is actually good instead of some of the other examples to the contrary. Alright, and those are some of the biggest heavy hitters today. There's a lot more systems, of course, but there's also some concentrated pockets between the NES and the Saturn specifically. On the whole, most of these games are great, which can be both good and bad. Nobody wins if a terrible game skyrockets in value, and likewise, folks will miss out on the opportunity to play the good ones when they do. That said, games holding some value is equally good for all physical gamers, collectors, or otherwise. Which games do you have in your collection that have jumped in price? Let me know down in the comments down below, and as always, I appreciate you watching Retro Ranger.